So now we have Matt Souza from lecturing from this university, so that's pretty sweet. And he's talking about sensing the world around us, so it should be a pretty good talk. So get your phones out, tweet away, and give Matt a round of applause.
All right, everyone. How are we all doing? Surviving the conference? Well, I think this is it'll be my talk, and then we'll have Emma Kidman from Boeing Defence Australia who'll give the talk after me, and I think we're just before lunch. So we'll keep that in mind. So yes, I'm going to be talking about essentially sensor networks, the Internet of Things. It's probably a buzzword that you've heard, and you would have heard that in the last talk, and so on. So just a little quick thing about blurb about me. Unfortunately, I didn't send it in time to the organizers, but if you want to know a little about me and so on, I graduated twice from UQ. I think once was enough, but I had to do it again, and so on. Since then, I've been working I did 5 years at CSIRO, and now I've been lecturing part-time at UQ. As well as that, I'm also doing a little bit of work at CSIRO. That's with the CSIRO Data 6.1 division. So for those of you interested, the CSIRO Data 6.1 division, it's a new division that was created by the amalgamation of what was NICTA with CSIRO. It's a new entity that's just come into being. So some of my experience that I've had sort of in this area with sensor networks, IoTs, and so on, particularly around indoor localization. See some of my experience there. I do describe myself as a little bit of a startup junkie, and so on. I've been involved in about 5 startups over the last 10 years. Every time I get involved with one, I say, this will be the last one. But new opportunities keep coming around. And there's some of my research interests. So I'm interested in sort of the embedded systems, which is something which I teach a lot, wireless sensor networks, digital systems, and so on. All right, so that's about me. Okay, so the Internet of Things. Okay, it's a buzzword that's really come around in, I would say, the last 5 or so years. But people have been doing things with sensors for a very long time. So on, since, I would say, since the middle of last century and so on. So essentially, with the Internet of Things or with sensor networks, what you're trying to do is you're trying to measure physical phenomena and get that information into a domain that you can process, so the digital domain. Okay, so you can have sort of everyday objects, you know, that they can communicate, they can give off sensor information about the surroundings or about other parameters of that object, and so on. They're what we call cyber-physical systems, and so on. So this is essentially sensors that give off information that goes into a system that can be accessed, processed, and used to perhaps control things and so on. So say, for example, in here, you've got lots and lots of sensors. You've got fire alarm sensors, temperature sensors for the air conditioning, light sensors, and so on. Security cameras to make sure you don't walk off with the furniture. And all of those sensors and those systems produce information that has to go somewhere and has to be processed and used. Okay, and one of the key things about IoTs is what we call sensor networks, and that's sort of a sort of domain, I'd say domain of what we call embedded systems that deals with this. I just thought I'd show this graphic here. So you can see here, this shows sort of a representation of the ratio of the number of people, population of the Earth versus the number of things connected to the Internet. So you can see here, 2003, all right, early this century, and so on. There's obviously, the Internet is still probably in its infancy, so people are just sort of starting to use it and trying to do things with it. So there's not so many things connected to the Internet, it's more people using it. See, 2010, it's now gone completely the other way around. Now you've got lots of things, more than the population of Earth that's now connected to the Internet, and you can see the trend starts to grow. 2015, And of course, by 2020, they're predicting there'll be at least 50 billion things, okay? Not just humans, but things, machines, and so on, sensors and whatnot, that'll be connected to the internet. So as I like to think about, by 2020, Skynet or form of Skynet should be active. Hopefully nobody will connect it up to guns or something. All right, sensor networks. So this is sort of the sort of more in-depth or scientific application of sensor networks. So if you put sensors in the environment, whether it's an outdoor environment, an indoor environment, you can use it to sense phenomena such as temperature, humidity, and so on. And then you can use that information essentially as a microscope, or in this case here as a macroscope, to find out how things are developing, or how things are what's happening in that environment, and so on. And there's been a few classical deployments and so on. So here we've got sort of a winery that's got sensor networks in the soil, okay, that's mapping various characteristics about the soil, and the farmer can use that information to determine how much fertilizer to put around the place, or where to grow different types of grapes, and so on. So that's all, I guess, sort of sensor information. And of course, there's lots of databases that various organizations, government and non-government, corporations, and so on, are building up. And there are all these huge databases that are being created. And the question that's occurring now is, well, what do you do with that data? Can you use it to predict trends, and so on? Is there something useful that you can do to better people's lives? So that's sort of, I guess, the one of the goals and applications of using sensor networks. All right, so looking at what it is and so on. So sensor networks, you can see here, you've got not just the sensing devices, so that's the hardware. You need a way of getting that information out of the sensor, so that's where you have some sort of network connectivity and so on. And there might be some scenarios where instead of just sending that information out somewhere, you might want to be able to process that information and take some sort of action or look for something, and so on. So here you can see this is probably a little bit of history here that started out at Berkeley, early 2000 and so on. They came out, the first ones came out with the crossbow motes and so on, with base station, and they deployed them around various sites and so on. They were doing essentially environmental sensing or industrial sensing, and also trying to use it for sort of human interaction scenarios. So those were the first few scenarios that people targeted sensor networks towards. In fact, I think the early acronym before sensor networks was, I think they came up with smart dust. So essentially you would throw out these sensors all over the place like dust, and so on. They would collect the information, and you would get it back in a nice database which you could use and control. Okay. So I thought I'd show this one. This is this graph. This is or cycle. This is the Ghana hype cycle. So it's based on data that's gathered by Ghana about different technologies and where they are in terms of development, in terms of being adopted and being used. And so it's an interesting graph to look at. So you can see here they've got various stages of the graph. You've got the innovation trigger. So when a new technology comes out, there's a lot of hype about it. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of funding as well, and so on. So it sort of ramps up, and then you get sort of the peak of the expectation. So, people have figured out exactly what can you get from this technology, and what do you need to do in order to get further, to further it, and so on. And there might be a certain limit that they can do. After that, you've got the trough of disillusionment. So this is when people have discovered that you can't really go further with the technology, or it's not been taken up, say, as a consumer device, or government regulations have come in and essentially killed it, and so on, as happens in a lot of cases. And then after that, you've got the slope of enlightenment, so the technology reawakes, and so on. People discover new uses for it, and then you've got the plateau of productivity. So if we have a look here, you can see here, Internet of Things, 2015, they predicted it's reached the peak now. So, and I think wearable computing, autonomous vehicles, here we go, IoT-based platforms, still it's in the innovation trigger, and so on. So IoT is definitely, I would say it's probably not at its peak yet, but there's definitely a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm about using IoTs. You can see there's a few other things. I thought it was interesting. Cryptocurrency exchange in the trough of disillusionment. I think that's probably more to do with governments than actual technology. So, but that's sort of why I guess you could tell there's a lot of interest around IoT. All right, so just let's get into some of the hardware and software aspects of it. So wireless sensor networks. Okay, the classical view is that you've got sort of small platforms that use very little power. They have one or two sensors built into them. They have some sort of wireless transceiver, not necessarily RF. It could be ultrasound or infrared or whatever. And so all that communicates back to a base station, and the base station essentially will take whatever it gets and pump it up to the cloud or to some sort of database. And then from there, you also have, once it's in the cloud, you can do all sorts of things. You can show it to people. You can download it, access it with apps, and so on. But the key thing is getting that data in situ, so from the environment up to the cloud. And of course, you've got other sort of high-performance computing platforms. So these are not necessarily the small embedded devices, high performance, such as mobile phones and so on. That's what we consider to be sort of high-performance computing platform. Someone takes a photo of a situation, of a flood or whatever, that can go up to a database, and that can be used for all sorts of applications. So that's essentially the infrastructure about wireless sensor networks. You've got sensor sources moving all the way to a data sink. All right, so I'll just sort of show some of the work and platforms that was done or is still being done at CSIRO. So they developed a particularly robust sensor network platforms and so on. It's in that little blue box. It's got a little solar panel on board and so on, and that contains all the electronics on board. As underneath that, you've got cables going to various sensors, weather sensors, humidity sensors, soil moisture, and so on. And they've deployed that in a number of areas here. I think that photo there is actually in Springbrook National Park on the Gold Coast hinterland. And that's a full weather station there. So they're deployed in various things, various fields, sort of paddocks, and literally all around the country. You can actually find some of these blue boxes, and most of that some of that work is still ongoing. So here were the types of deployments that they were doing. So they were wanting to measure sort of environmental phenomena. So here deploying weather station in Springbrook National Park in sort of a rainforest. They deployed a whole array of buoys with sensors on Lake Wivenhoe. That is, of course, before the 2011 flood. After the 2011 flood, those sensors floated away and so on. So that was there. There's a new one, recent one that they're working on, a biosecurity one. I think this one is up in far north Queensland, up in Cairns and so on, so being able to track bats with GPS trackers and so on. If you can determine where the bat colonies are and their behavior patterns, you can monitor and take various types of actions. There's a lot of interest around using sensor networks for agriculture, sort of smart farming, being able to determine where your cattle is, what they're doing, and so on is actually quite important information to farmers. And another one that's of interest is energy monitoring. Okay, so being able to monitor how energy is used in an office space over time, and so on, that can lead to all sorts of sort of power power savings and whatnot. So there's some interesting work that they've done there. All right, so a little about the hardware. I mean, the types of platforms we're talking here are actually very comparable to PCs, in the late 80s, early 90s, and so on. I think, we're in this case here, that's an 8-bit platform, so that's probably comparable, to 286 and whatnot, so the 80s. But now you get even more powerful computing platforms, 32-bit cores, so getting up to the late 90s sort of type of processing power and so on. So you've got these microcontrollers or processors on board, and there's a lot of resources on there that you can use to connect to various sensors and to do processing. So some of the history, so CSIRO has had quite a, you can say now, it's been almost 10 years that they've been working in this field. And as technology has changed, they've changed their platforms as well to suit the needs of their projects that they deliver and so on. So they started off with sort of 8-bit platforms. They imported the first few sensor modes from the US and so on. After that, they decided they weren't good enough, and they decided to make their own. They made a sort of a large family of sensing devices. So on, and this one here is the current one, and there's a new one that's about to come out. But this has gone all the way from 8 bits, that's a 32-bit one, and that's a 16-bit one, and so on. So there's sort of a whole generation of hardware that's gone through. So I'd probably point out that probably 2003, sites like SparkFun, Little Bird, and so on probably weren't around, and so on. So trying to make this stuff in the early 2000s was certainly quite challenging, and there certainly wasn't a lot of platforms available. But now there is. So these were some of the boards that they developed. They spend quite a lot of money. When you pay engineers to design this and so on, it can actually be quite costly to do that. But now you can find literally all of these sensors and so on, from places like SparkFun or Little Bit and so on. They're quite cheap. You can find, things like Geiger counters, radiation sensors. I'm not sure what you want a radiation sensor for. Might be some questions around that. But you can, if you want to, measure how much water your plants are getting, you can get sensors for that. You can get GPS trackers for $30 or so. So that's sort of the hardware that's sort of out there, and there's a lot of it, and it's fairly reasonable in terms of cost. As well as the hardware, you also have so the operating systems and the protocols, the software, the development environments. So they've also come a long way within 10 years or so. So you've got various operating systems that you can put on the platforms that allow you to do certain things. They've got the design for certain features, particular things like low power, being able to communicate to different sensors. Of course, they've got lots of communication stacks built into it. You might have an IPv6 stack built into it, and so on. And there's a few different OSs around. TinyOS is probably one of the first ones. Kentucky is another popular one. FreeRTOS, Riot. They actually decided to put IoT in their acronym. So on. And of course, IDEs have come a long way. You've got Mbed, Arduino, and so on. So all of that is sort of developed, I would say, really in the last 10 to 15 years. And it makes those platforms more easy to use. You don't have to pay $1,000 for a license to use a compiler. And of course, there are various communication protocols that have been designed by various standard bodies and corporations. So Zigbee is a popular one. Bluetooth Low Energy, 6LoWPAN, and of course you've got the two big ones that are coming out now. You've got the Apple iBeacons one that's supporting, of course, Google's coming out with their Eddystone protocol for their Nest line of products and so on. And you've got other protocols supported, such as MQTT, XMPP, and so on, like that, designed to get data out of the sensor network, designed to interface to the internet. And of course, security is an important thing. And a lot of these platforms actually do have security features built into it, such as encryption engines or SSH support. All right, so that's probably enough about sensor networks and IoT and what's available and what you can do with them. So I'm going to show you some projects that the students in my advanced embedded systems subjects did at the beginning of the year. So essentially how the subject works, they do a whole bunch of laboratories, they get to know how to use the sensor hardware, and then for their final assessment, they have to do a final project. So essentially it's, I give them hardware and they do something cool with it. If they break it, well, I break their marks and so on. But here I sort of pull out a few different examples that some of the students have done. And they're all sort of different, using different platforms and so on. Some are Wi-Fi, some are not. Some are smartphones and so on. So this one here is sort of infrared detection, so being able to detect in this case here, if you can track a face, and you have, in this case here, the FLIR infrared camera, if you could try and pick up the heart rate as the blood flushes through the face, obviously at the same rate as the blood is pumping through your heart. So from that, if you can detect the change in heat pattern, then perhaps you can pick up the heart rate and so on. So this was the idea around this project. And they did it, I would say this is probably a high-performance computing platform, so it was based on a Raspberry Pi and so on. So they essentially connected up the infrared sensor, the FLIR sensor, with a camera. They interfaced that to the Raspberry Pi and so on, and they essentially wrote a web page portal to access the information. So you can see here some of the hardware, Raspberry Pi, and there's the actually, and I actually do have the unit here, which probably can have a look later. I'll actually see if I can, hopefully it's still working. Yes, there it is. So this is that's the infrared mode working. So you can see here, you can see the infrared. I think that's a little brighter. Okay, it's cold up here. That's fine. So that's using the FLIR module. It's about $500 from SparkFun. So they didn't break this one. As I said, there was only one. If you break it, so see if the all right, the camera output's not working. But there we go. All right, so that was one of the projects one group did. That was, of course, done by Chris Rieger and Rory Charlton. So we had another group, and for this group, they wanted to use a LiDAR. Okay, so that's essentially a sort of a radar, but using lasers and so on. So you can have a LiDAR, you can spins around the sensor, and essentially takes a whole point of distance measuring. So if it runs into the laser beam, detects an object, it'll measure how far that is away. And by using that information, combining that with angular information, you can actually do point clouds and so on. And you can try and reconstruct the environment around the LiDAR and so on. So they essentially, they did that, and they decided that they'll think about how you would do a network of these devices and so on to try and pick up ubiquitous human movement. So on, so they Wi-Fi enabled the LiDAR. and so on. So all that information was detected. They had a computing system, embedded system connected to the LiDAR. It would process the information, and then it would send the result off via Wi-Fi to central access point, where it would be displayed. So that's the LiDAR system there. You can't see it, but this one here is the LiDAR, so it spins. So on, it's actually they actually use these in some of the robotic vacuum cleaners and so on. But we bought one for $500. Apparently, it's actually cheaper in the vacuum cleaner than it is to buy it separately. It's an interesting device here. So you can see here that's a LiDAR. Then underneath it is another stepper motor that spins, and that allows it to essentially create a 3D point cloud. Here's some of the things they did. So they put it inside, or put a milk crate around it, and so on. You can see here it's picked up the milk crate. You can see that sort of 3D. You can see most of the milk crate here. All right, I didn't approve of this one, but he tells me you can still see fine. Andre there, so you can see it's probably a little too difficult to see, but yeah, it's picked up. It's definitely picked up his hands there. Oh no, hang on, that's him over there. It's flipped around. So it's picked up his face, and you can see his hands and so on. So that's picked up Andre there. And then they did a big test. So they did it in Lewin's kitchen. So on, so you can see it's probably a little too difficult to see, but you can definitely make out the contours of the cupboards and so on. And there's the stove there, and it doesn't detect the window, and so on. So that was a project using the LiDAR, and that was done with Lewin, Andre, and Sebastian. So this next one was done with Rohan, Patrick, Michael, and Albert, and so on. So essentially, the aim around this project was to try and determine through Wi-Fi where something was. So if you put a Wi-Fi module, previous presenter showed one of those cheap little Wi-Fi modules. We used some of those. Essentially, if you put that on your keys and you lose your keys, could you find your key by simply trying to localize through Wi-Fi where that Wi-Fi module was that was on your key, and so on. So based on being able to do things such as using the signal strength. So if you have a Wi-Fi module that connects to an access point, as the signal comes from the access point to the Wi-Fi module, it'll lose a little bit of power in the signal. So trying to determine how much power it's lost in that signal allows you to get an accurate or an estimation of distance between that module and the access point. So on. So they did that. They built up essentially a database and so on. So there are databases online of access points that people log. If they find an access point, they'll log it online if they detect it. And so the idea was to try and determine where the key was, and also to be able to display that. In this case here, they decided to display it with using augmented reality and so on, and some of the implementation aspects. They used a Raspberry Pi to do this. So you can see down here, this is essentially the system. Over here, they've got the keys are somewhere there. It communicates with the nearest access points and so on. All that information goes up to the server, so the server knows what access points the key is communicating with, and then by using the signal strength, they can try and localize it down. So they could sort of localize it, to, in this case here, within a building. At least you've lost your keys somewhere within the building or within that radius. Better than nothing. And here you can see it used. It's a little small to see, but that's one of the embedded ESP8266 Wi-Fi modules that you can get. All right, and they were able to show that on a Google map. All right, so some of the augmented reality libraries that they used and things that they did, and so on. So they used Google Cardboard. Who here has a Google Cardboard? Cool. Yeah, so Google Cardboard, I think, came out last year, late last year and whatnot. So essentially, with Google Cardboard, you can, wear the mask and so on. You can put your smartphone there, wear the mask, and then you can try and turn around, and you can try and find. It'll display sort of, where the key is on the display. So you can see here, this is essentially showing it, the application here. So you can see here, I think that's where the key is. It's found it. It's somewhere there. It's found it there again, and so on. So it just sort of shows, the key, big set of keys. I wanted a big red dot, but they wanted to put keys on it. So there's the key there. So as you turn around, once you see the key icon pop up in front of your eyes, and you know that you're facing the right direction, and so on. And there you can see here is Rahan wearing the setup. All right. So another project that I did a few times actually with Vanessa, Tim, and Daniel from University of Wollongong was to what we call radio tomographic imaging. So radio tomographic imaging is trying to predict or localize where someone is without any devices. So it's sort of like a radar. So that previous project that I showed you, they did it with a device. This one here is without a device. And so on. And by using things such as putting lots of motes around an area that you want to track people in, and so on, because humans are filled with water, so as radio signals pass through a human, it'll attenuate, and by using those attenuations, you can try and determine if someone's there. So you can see here, we had sort of an area in a zone with all the motes around. And by using that information, you can actually track people that were moving around. So where the big red dot was a big disturbance in the radio communication area, and that was obviously caused by a person. All right. So the probably last project that I'll go through is one that was actually done by Emma, who will be presenting next. And she did what I call a diving coach monitor for her thesis. So essentially being able to use inertial sensors on a diving athlete to try and measure how they perform their dive, and also try and determine if they're diving too much or they're under fatigue and so on. So being able to try and let coaches manage divers with using vibrations. So essentially, it consisted of a wearable sensor. So the diver would wear the sensor, and you'd have a base station, and you'd have a smartphone app that the coach would use to control. Wearable sensor essentially had a motion sensor that tracked how a diver was moving, and it had a vibration sensor that allowed the coach to say, okay, probably wrong move, buzz, and so on. And that was based on a wearable sensing platform called Shadow. And we had a base station that essentially extended the range of that sensor, and it also provided a Bluetooth link that allowed you to connect with smartphones. And of course, the smartphone was used to view the output. Here's sort of the whole system here. As you can see, you've got the base station, you've got the wearable sensor here, and this was the smartphone app that the coach used to control the whole system. All right. So I'll probably I'll finish it here and so on. Probably while Emma's setting up, I can take one or two questions.
Yeah, we only have time for one. So where's Emma? Stand ready. Cool. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time for questions, but if there's one really quick question while Emma's setting up, we can take that. Otherwise, I will. Yeah. I think you're hanging around this afternoon, Matt.
Yep.
Yep. So Matt's hanging around this afternoon, so you can speak to him then. But Matt touched on some really, really cool things, I think. So you saw the whole range of different things we can use sensors for in today's world, and I know from all the comments that were coming up on Twitter that everyone's minds are just blown by the amount of stuff now that's actually connected to the internet. I know I have at least 10 different things connected to internet, or most other people have a lot more. So let's give a round of applause to Matt for his fantastic talk.